All right, the first thing we're going to do today is to check the assignment that was due, that was to be written in complete sentences on page 33. So we're going to start with Matthew.
The Greek historian was referring to the Nile River when he called Egypt the gift of the river.
That is correct. Any question? Number 2.
Three major periods of ancient Egyptian history are the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom.
That is correct. Any questions? That's worth 3 points. Count them, 3. All right. Number 3, Griff.
Thutmose III was referred to as the Napoleon of Egypt.
It's Thutmose III. Any question? All right. Number 4, Stephen.
The pharaoh was atop the social structure of ancient Egypt.
Right, Pharaoh. And number 5, John.
The important discovery that enabled John Chamberlain to read hieroglyphics is the Rosetta Stone.
Right, the Rosetta Stone. How many of you have heard of the Rosetta Stone before? Okay, almost everybody. Good. Okay, put at the top how many you missed. Put a -0 or -1, whatever it was. And then let me have them. If you're at home, you can mail your results to me. Okay, I write late on the top. You didn't have your heading on either? Remember, if your heading is not ready to give to me when I ask it, then it's late. That's good enough. Got it now. All right, we're going to move now into the civilization you were reading about in your text, which I think is one of the most exciting because there are so many instances where things that happen in the Bible intersect with what's happening, and that's ancient Egypt. It's a fantastic time period. So let's open your notes to that section. Ancient Egypt. Voila. Okay, everybody have their notes ready to go? Ancient Egypt. All right. First, we'll begin with what's called the Archaic period, and that simply refers to basically the time right after the flood when people first started going there. And in the Archaic period, looking at around 4000 BC, we noticed that right away the reason that people go to this area is because of water. That's what attracts most people to live in the areas in which they first go. So the importance of the Nile River is of primary importance. The Nile River is so important that when in the hieroglyphics, the picture writing of Egypt, whenever they wanted to picture the idea of going north, they would picture a boat without a sail, and if they wanted to picture go south, they pictured a boat with a sail. Now, why would that match up? Why would a picture with a sail be going south? What does that tell you about the river?
It flows south.
If it flows south, then would you need a sail going south?
It flows north.
It flows north, the opposite. So if it's flowing north, you don't need a sail, and so a ship without a sail indicates that you're going north, and then the opposite is true. All right, we'll get a map up here of Egypt pretty soon, so we can see those things on the map. The Nile offered protection for Egypt, and there were a couple other things that offered protection, and that is, as you look to the west of Egypt, you see that there's desert there. And to the east, there's also some desert. So that kind of prevented people from invading from those directions. In addition, the cataracts that are in the south of the Nile River. The Nile River flows north from the mountains down toward the Mediterranean Sea, and the cataracts, or those little rapids, also prevented people from invading Egypt from that direction, because you can't get your boats through those rapids, those falls. So Egypt was protected by the natural resources, the natural natural boundaries that were there. All right, we want to continue looking at the Nile River in relationship to the seasons. There are 3 seasons in the year of Egypt. The first season is called the flood season, and that's from June to September, the season of flooding. These are pictures, by the way, of the Nile River that we're seeing in the background. All right, after flooding, any ideas what the next season would be? What do you have to do if you want to grow crops? What do you have to do before you can harvest them?
Plant them.
Yeah, you got to plant them. So the next season is planting season, and that's from October to February. So after the flood waters go down, then they can plant. By the way, the flood waters would bring fresh topsoil filled with minerals from the mountains down to the area of Egypt, and then when the flood waters receded, they left all that nice new topsoil. So it gave them a good opportunity to plant and to grow good crops. All right, then once you have planted, what's the next season you want to look forward to? Harvesting, and that's from March through May. Since we're talking about the Nile River, I thought I'd show you a few pictures that I took on the Nile. I think it's particularly nice to see both sailboats going on the Nile River. And along the Nile, you see water buffalo. This is just the scene along the Nile. I don't know if you ever looked at a picture of Egypt and seen the Nile, you'll see it's sort of green all along the Nile River. And I don't know what I used to think about that, but I guess I thought it couldn't really be that way, but it really is that way. It is green right along the Nile, and as soon as you get, sometimes a matter of 50 yards, sometimes maybe a mile, it's not green anymore. It's only green right along there. And you can see it here. You can see it's green right back to these trees, and beyond that it's brown back into these mountains back here. You can see it again there. You can see the roadways right along the Nile. And there's a nice shot in the evening. Lots of trees along the Nile, lots of vegetation. There's a little building. And there's a couple of fellows that are gathering some kind of vegetation from along there. I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't papyrus, I know that, but what it was, I'm not sure. There's another sailboat. Water buffalo. Do you see what's standing in trees?
It's a donkey.
Yeah, the donkey. It's almost camouflaged back in there in the shadow. Now, from earliest times, Egypt was divided into 2 sections, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Now, when we look on a map, we think that upper and lower relates to direction north and south. We usually think of upper as being north and lower being south, but that's not the way it is in Egypt, certainly. Upper refers to where the elevation is higher and where the Nile River originates. lower refers to where the elevation is lower, where it goes into the Mediterranean Sea. So Upper Egypt would be to the south. Lower Egypt is to the north. You got that? Do I follow? All right, so originally there were two Egypts, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. But a guy by the name of Menes united Egypt. Now, he came from Upper Egypt, from the south, and came in and conquered Lower Egypt. Now, from the earliest times, the inhabitants of Africa, including the Egyptians, who in the Bible are called Mizraim, and the Ethiopians, who are called Cush, were dark-skinned, but they were black. Cush is a Hebrew word which means black. And Ethiopia is a Greek word meaning a man with a burned or black face. Mizraim means children of the sun. Visiting Egypt around AD 500, the Greek historian Herodotus stated, quote, "It is certain the natives of the countries are black with heat, that they are black-skinned and have woolly hair." A melanin test was taken from the skin of an Egyptian mummy. The melanin proved that the Egyptian was black. Now, I point that out to you because so often when we see pictures of Egyptians or we see movies about Egyptians, they're pretty white-skinned or light-skinned at least, maybe even brown. But in reality, the ancient Egyptians were black. And you can tell that maybe from some of the statues and hieroglyphics that we have. All right, so Menes united Egypt and began the first dynasty. Do you understand what a dynasty is? What's a dynasty? Anybody know? A dynasty refers to a particular family who rules a country. And when that family no longer is ruling, another family comes in, that starts another dynasty. So he began the first dynasty where a family is going to pass on from father to son, ruling over a united Egypt. He's the one that took to himself the name Pharaoh, which means great house, house referring to family. So he is the one who represents a great house, a great family who has conquered all of Egypt. This Pharaoh, Menes, or he took upon himself the name Narmer after he conquered, also employed an official which he called a vizier. A vizier is simply an overseer of all the works of the king. So the king is in charge, but he puts a vizier to kind of run everything. So he doesn't have to be involved with the day-to-day operations. Now, keep that vizier in mind because we're going to come across a person later on who is going to be called a vizier. Menes ruled for 62 years. And you know what did him in? He was carried off by a hippo and killed. What a way to go, huh? A hippo. Do you know that hippopotami, I guess would be the plural, kill more people in Africa every year than lions? Yeah, so watch out for those hippos. This is something called the Palette of Narmer. This is something that he had made in order to celebrate his victory and his ruling over both North and South, or Upper and Lower Egypt. This is the original. You can make out the figures on here. This is a colorized version, which you can see maybe a little bit better. What's going on here? Can you not tell what's happening here? Yeah, and this is Narmer or Menes, and what's he doing? He's got a club here. He's got this guy by the hair, and he's going to club him. All right. Can you tell what this guy is? he's holding Menes' sandals. He's his sandal bearer. Okay, what do you think these guys are down here? They're dead. They represent all the people that he killed. All right, let's see what else we got. He's got a white crown on. That's a crown, and that is the crown of Upper Egypt, from where he came. And he's smiting a captive of war. Okay, and then we have up here a hawk. That hawk represents the king himself. And he's holding an enemy. This is representing an enemy. He's holding an enemy by a ring in his nose. And he sits on 6 flowers. It's coming out of the enemy. Those 6 flowers represent how many were killed. 6,000. I'm sorry, prisoners taken. 6,000 prisoners taken. So many more were killed. Behind the Pharaoh, then, is standard bearers we saw. At the top, we have 2 heads of cows. Well, that represents the goddess Hathor. And it flanks the king's name. The king's name is right there. So the god Hathor is with him, backing him. That is the name of Narmer. The name Narmer is represented by a catfish and a chisel. That means Narmer. On the bottom, we've got those 2 men who have the sign town and its name right here. Now, on the other side of the palette, we see some more scenes. This is not colorized, but drawn a little bit so you can see it here. All right, so here, you can't tell, but now he's wearing a red crown, representing Lower Egypt. And in front of him are his standard bearers, carrying his flags and banners. And what are these? What's this look like here? Well, no, not exactly. I mean, it is picture writing, but what are these figures? Can you tell? Do they look like anything?
People
Yeah, they're people.
walking.
What?
Walking.
Walking? Well, they're this way though. They're laying this way. What are they?
Dead.
They're dead. Okay, anything missing from these bodies?
Their heads.
Their heads.
Oh,
Their
their
heads are down here, in between their
Oh,
legs.
death.
So those are the 2 rows of beheaded enemies. Okay, now we've got 2 what are called mythological creatures in the middle, symbolizing the reunification of Upper and Lower Egypt. But these 2 so-called mythological creatures look very similar to what?
Giraffes.
Giraffes? That would have been my first guess. They look like dinosaurs, right? Got the long necks intertwined. Now, they just make that up? Well, they didn't make up a cow. They didn't make up some of these other things, so I suspect they knew what that was too. Symbolizing the 2 Egypts being united. And then at the bottom we have a bull, which represents the king, and it's crushing or destroying a fortress. And of course that's one of the enemies, stamping on the enemy and crushing the fortress. All right, so that's Menes or Narmer. So if you're asked who united Egypt, you should probably say Menes. We'll also accept Narmer, a name that he took for himself. All right, any questions about Menes and this palette? It's not very big. I can't. It's in a museum in Cairo, Egypt, but that museum. I'm glad to see they're rebuilding. They're building a new museum because that one was so little taken care of. There was dust and dirt all over the place. They didn't even have signs on some of the stuff. And I do remember seeing this on a glass case, but I don't think they even had a sign telling me what it was. I don't, if there was, I didn't notice it or see it. And I can't remember exactly, but I think, it was about maybe that big, maybe a little bigger, somewhere in there. So it's not huge. Anyway. All right. We mentioned that Narmer had 2 crowns. Here we have a look at them. Here's the red crown of Lower Egypt, the white crown of Upper Egypt. Now what you'll see in hieroglyphics of pharaohs a lot of times, the 2 put together, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Here's a feathered crown worn by Osiris. Here's some different crowns that we might see from time to time. Here is a picture of a pharaoh wearing his white crown, and you can see he has both a, what are they calling that, a flail. So you can't see on the end of it, there would be pieces of leather or something sticking out there that you would hit somebody. So that side is the punishment, and then he has this side, which is like a shepherd's crook. That indicates that he's the shepherd of his people. And we'll see if we can figure out where that came from. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, this is called a vulture headdress. So it looked like a bird sitting on the queen's head. The pharaohs wore makeup, eye makeup. See on both of them. Wore a pleated dress. So that's how the pharaoh and his wife would dress. All right, now you all know probably, without me even saying it, what style of writing the Egyptians used. What do they call their writing? Hieroglyphics, and that just simply means picture writing. So here's an example of hieroglyphics. You can see some hieroglyphics here, and they are pictures. Here's a photograph of an actual place where the hieroglyphics, this time they're written down. Hieroglyphics can be written right to left, left to right, or up and down. And there's usually a symbol telling the reader which way to go on the hieroglyphics. If you're interested in finding out how to write your name in hieroglyphics, that website might be helpful if it's still around. I find so often I find a website and a couple years later it's no longer in existence. So if you just Google write my name in hieroglyphics, you'll probably find someplace. You might be interested. I'll bring in later this week a picture that my wife and I bought in which they put our names in hieroglyphics. Basically, they just took the letters of our names and made a picture symbol for them. I want you to see how hieroglyphics are dominant throughout Egypt. This is called the Great Hall at the Temple of Karnak, and you can see hieroglyphics all over these columns. One time there was a roof on this. It's no longer there. It's true. Many of the temples and buildings in Egypt, the roof is gone. Here's another example. More hieroglyphics at Edfu Temple. In this particular one, Pharaoh is being baptized with water from the Nile in preparation to enter the temple of Horus. So he'd be baptized before going into the temple. And here is the messenger God giving a scroll to Pharaoh. See the scroll in his hand. Here's a wall at Edfu Temple, and it's just filled with hieroglyphics. They wrote everywhere. They drew pictures everywhere in the temples and in the buildings. You can see this may be baptizing the Pharaoh again. Putting on his crown. This is our guide in Egypt. His name is Midu, and he was a great guide. He was a Christian, which is hard to find in Egypt, and he also had his master's degree in ancient Egyptology, which meant that he could even read the hieroglyphics. And his particular interest was integrating the Bible with Egypt, which was my interest too. So I was really fascinated to hear what he had to say and to talk with him, and found that any of the things that I had researched, he had come up with the same conclusions. But you can see the hieroglyphics here behind him. Just here are big pictures showing what's happening, and then the explanation with all these little hieroglyphics. Can you tell what that is?
Oh, crocodile.
How did you get that? Very good. I don't think anybody ever guesses crocodile because it doesn't really look that much like one. But Griff got it. First guess. All right. Because they worship crocodile. This is a crocodile on a table, and I think maybe that's a table in which they're going to mummify him. We went into a temple that was dedicated to worshiping the crocodile, and apparently they had mummified crocodiles that were found there. So that's the crocodile on a table. This is a calendar. And have you ever been someplace where somebody explained something and you thought, I don't need to write that down, I'll remember it? Maybe it's that way in class sometimes. Is that right? Well, that's what I thought about this calendar. I'll remember what are the months and what are the days, and now I forget. I didn't write it down. So I think that these are months. No, this would be the day. I don't know. It's a calendar. Just leave it at that. Anybody know what this person's doing? Here? Who said that? Griff, you're on a roll. Yeah, that's a birthing stool. That's a woman giving birth. And that's the god of giving birth. It's kind of an ugly little thing. His name is Bess. All right, so that's the hieroglyphics. Now, one of the other things that they had to figure out how to do in Egypt, even though they had flooding, there were times that you maybe when they needed more water, or maybe the flooding wasn't there, to get water out of the Nile and get it onto the fields. And so they developed systems of irrigation. And they invented something called a shadoof. You can see in this picture of them using this. It's weighted on one end, and the pole goes down, and there's a bucket, and they're able to put water in, and then the weight on this will pull the water up, and they can turn it and dump it into the next bucket or into the field. Here's a drawing of it. You can see here's the weight. Bucket goes down, gets the water, is brought up, and it's swung around and then dumped wherever they want it. They call it a shadoof. Any questions? You see how that works? Another aspect of Egyptian culture was the growing of papyrus. What was papyrus used for? To make scribes. So you take the papyrus and you build a person. The stuff they write, what do we call stuff they write on? What do we call that? Paper. Yes. We get the word paper from papyrus. You see the relationship?
Yeah.
A scribe is someone who does what?
Like, writes on.
Writes. He's the guy that writes on the paper. That's a scribe. So they developed a way to make paper out of the plant papyrus. And so unlike the Sumerians who had to use clay and use a wedge-shaped instrument in that, making cuneiform, the Egyptians were able to develop paper and write with ink on them. And this is a picture of a scribe, and he has a writing table here and writes, and then they're rolled into scrolls. I'm going to show you some pictures of a lady making papyrus for us, and I'll go fast so it looks like she's moving. Okay, so you've got to look really carefully. Look at this. Catch all that? Oh, the last one, it's dark, kind of spot on. Okay, just see what she did? She took the papyrus and stripped it, so you have some nice even strips, and then wet it, laid it out, laid it. Maybe you did something like that. I did when I was in elementary school. Make some kind of a mat where you interwove the different colors of strips of paper. Did you ever do that? Like red and green at Christmas time. And it looks like a mat. Well, if you do that and it's wet with the papyrus, and then she used a press. You see this press on our right, puts it in there and presses the water out and pushes all those fibers together, and then when it dries, it's paper. Some pictures didn't make it. Oh, there's the final product she's holding up. All these things behind her on the wall are papyrus also. They do a really nice job of painting on them. I think it's particularly pretty when they use black paint as a background. So I really like this one. And I'll show you the one that my wife and I bought, hopefully tomorrow. I forgot to bring it in. All right, we're going to stop there because that completes our look at ancient Egypt, or the oldest kingdoms of Egypt, united Egypt under Medes and those that followed him. The assignment for tomorrow is I want you to read, because I realize that many students in Christian school haven't necessarily read the parts of the Bible that relate to what we're doing. So that you have at least some idea, I'm going to assign you to read some portions of Scripture from time to time. So for tomorrow, I want you to read Genesis 1 through 11. Yeah, 11 chapters. Don't read for detail. Just read it through to get the idea of what's happening, okay? Genesis 1 through 11. So you're not going to be tested over it. I'm just going to ask you tomorrow if there's anything there that you didn't see before, or that you didn't remember, or you thought was pretty cool. All right? So read Genesis 1 through 11 for tomorrow. Any questions? And then we'll get back to Egypt.